This is the image they tried to bury. Picture a mahogany conference table in Brussels, 16 flags behind it, and the Canadian Prime Minister standing at a podium with a document in his hand that rewrites the entire architecture of Western defense. No American flag in sight. No American representative in the room. As of 11 a.m. this morning, Saturday, February 28, 2026, the full details of Prime Minister Mark Carney's secret NATO realignment pact have leaked to the press, and what they reveal is nothing short of a geopolitical earthquake. For the first time in the history of the Atlantic Alliance, a major NATO partner has signed a binding defense procurement agreement with the European Union that explicitly redirects military spending away from the United States. We are talking about $180 billion in Canadian defense procurement over the next decade. We are talking about the EU's $150 billion Safe Defense Fund opening its doors to a non-European nation for the first time in history. We are talking about a direct challenge to Lockheed Martin, to Boeing, to Raytheon, and to every American defense contractor that has treated allied nations as a captive market for 70 years. We are talking about the potential cancellation of $73.9 billion in F-35 fighter jet contracts. We are talking about the end of North American defense integration as we have known it since 1958, and Donald Trump reportedly had no idea it was coming. Sources inside the West Wing describe the president as blindsided. The National Security Council was not briefed. The Pentagon's liaison office in Ottawa received no advance notice. The American ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, learned about the final terms of the deal from a CBC News alert on his phone. This is not a diplomatic disagreement. This is not a trade spat. This is the first crack in the foundation of American military hegemony, and it was engineered by a former central banker who ran the Bank of England and now runs the second largest country on earth by territory. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly what Carney signed. We are going to explain the $900 billion defense spending plan that makes Canada the fastest rearming nation in NATO. We are going to reveal the secret clause in the EU partnership that could kill the F-35 fighter jet deal. And we are going to answer the question that nobody in Washington wants to ask. Has America already lost control of its own alliance? Buckle up. The maps of the Western world are being redrawn this weekend. To understand why this deal is so devastating to Washington, we have to go back to January 20th, 2026, when Mark Carney stood on the stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and delivered what diplomats are now calling the most consequential speech by a Western leader since Churchill's Iron Curtain address in 1946. The words were precise, the tone was glacial, the message was unmistakable. "We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition," Carney told the room. "Middle powers must act together because if we are not at the table, we are on the menu." He did not name Donald Trump. He did not need to. The speech drew a standing ovation. But here is what the cameras did not capture. According to leaked diplomatic cables obtained by European media outlets, Carney held a private dinner that evening with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The topic was a single document: the bilateral safe participation agreement that would make Canada the first non-European country to access the EU's $150 billion defense procurement fund. The deal had been in negotiation since June 2025, when Carney signed the Canada-EU Strategic Defense Partnership in Brussels, but the final terms go far beyond what anyone in Washington expected. Here is the financial plumbing that makes this so dangerous for the United States. The SAFE program, Security Action for Europe, is the EU's flagship defense spending mechanism. It provides $150 billion in low-interest loans to member states for military equipment purchases. The critical requirement is that 65% of component costs must originate from EU member states, the European Economic Area, or Ukraine. American manufacturers are explicitly capped at 35%. Canada's entry into this program means Ottawa can now partner with European defense firms on joint procurement projects, access favorable EU financing, and bid on contracts across the entire 27-member bloc. But here's the catch that nobody in the Pentagon saw coming. According to sources familiar with the agreement, the bilateral terms include a provision that Canadian defense purchases made through SAFE will count toward Canada's NATO spending commitments. This means Canada can hit its 5% of GDP NATO target by 2035, while simultaneously diverting the vast majority of that spending away from American defense contractors. The numbers are staggering. Canada's total defense investment over the next decade is projected at $900 billion. That includes $180 billion direct procurement, $290 billion in defense infrastructure, and $125 billion in downstream economic benefits. Under the old model, roughly 70% of Canada's defense capital spending went to American companies. Under the new model, sources say that number could drop below 30%. We are talking about tens of billions of dollars in lost revenue for Lockheed Martin alone. We are talking about the collapse of a procurement relationship that has defined North American defense cooperation since the Korean War. We are talking about the end of the assumption that Allied spending equals American profit. The F-35 fighter jet is the canary in the coal mine. In 2023, the Trudeau government signed a contract with Lockheed Martin for 88 F-35A Lightning II jets at a cost of $19 billion, with a life cycle cost of $73.9 billion. When Carney took office, he immediately ordered a review of the entire purchase. The review is still ongoing. According to leaked internal Defense Department assessments, Canada's Air Force commander has been told to prepare contingency plans for a split fleet, 44 F-35s from Lockheed Martin and 60 to 80 Gripen fighters from Sweden's Saab, a company based in a NATO member state with deep ties to the EU defense ecosystem. The NDP has publicly demanded that Carney cancel the F-35 contract entirely. When pressed in Parliament about payments already made for 14 additional F-35s, Carney framed the expenditure as preserving an option rather than a firm recommitment. Sources inside the Canadian Defense Department say the review will conclude this summer. If Canada cuts the order even by half, it sends a signal to every NATO ally on Earth: you do not need American jets to be a credible military power. That is the death knell for Lockheed Martin's monopoly position, and that is precisely what Carney intends. But the defense procurement shift is only the visible layer. Beneath it lies a strategic realignment that threatens the entire architecture of American global power. Remember, NATO was built on a simple bargain. America provides the security umbrella. The Allies provide the bases, the political legitimacy, and the market for American weapons. Donald Trump shattered that bargain. He threatened to annex Greenland, a territory belonging to Denmark, a founding NATO member. He told allies he would not defend countries that do not pay enough. He called for 5% of GDP spending, a number so extreme that even Belgium's conservative prime minister called it uncomfortable. And then he did something no American president has ever done. According to Reuters, the Trump administration began pressing behind closed doors for reforms to NATO's integrated military command structure. The plan: have the United States step back from leading NATO's force generation and defense planning processes entirely. Washington announced it would turn over operational command of the two remaining U.S.-led Allied Joint Force Command posts in Norfolk and Naples to European commanders. The U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, told a stunned audience at the Berlin Security Conference that he looked forward to the day when Germany would take over the Supreme Allied Commander position. This is not burden sharing. This is abandonment dressed in the language of partnership. It gets worse. The Davos speech was not an isolated event. It was the public reveal of a strategy months in the making. In October 2025, Carney met with Xi Jinping at the APEC summit in South Korea. Both countries called it a turning point. In January 2026, Carney visited Beijing for 3 days and secured a trade agreement lowering tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% to 6.1%. China reciprocated by cutting tariffs on Canadian canola oil from 85% to 15%. Then came Qatar, where a long-delayed investment deal was finalized. Then India, ASEAN, Thailand, the Philippines, Mercosur. 12 trade and security deals on 4 continents in 6 months. This is not a prime minister shopping for friends. This is a central banker constructing a parallel financial architecture designed to function without American participation. And here is what should terrify every strategist in Washington: it is working. Sources inside the Canadian Foreign Ministry describe it as Carney's variable geometry strategy. Different coalitions for different issues, all anchored by the principle that middle powers must never again be dependent on a single great power. And the great power they are running from is us. The psychological dimension of this is devastating. Trump views NATO as a protection racket. He has said so publicly, repeatedly, for years. He views Allied defense spending as tribute owed to America. Sources inside the White House say the president genuinely believed his pressure campaign was working, that the spending increases were a vindication of his hardline approach. And on paper they are. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte himself admitted at Davos that without Trump, 8 major economies would never have reached 2% in 2025. But here's the brutal irony the president refuses to see. The allies are spending more. They are just not spending it on America. Trump demanded a bigger pie and got it. But Carney is eating the slices. Every dollar Canada redirects from Lockheed Martin to Saab, from Boeing to Airbus Defense, from Raytheon to Rheinmetall is a dollar that proves Trump's leverage was an illusion. He scared them into spending. He did not scare them into loyalty. Now, let us talk about what this means for American defense contractors, because this is where your 401k and your pension fund intersect with geopolitics. Lockheed Martin derives approximately 27% of its revenue from international sales. Boeing Defense, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. These are the companies that sit in your retirement portfolio. When a major NATO ally signals that it is diversifying away from American weapons systems, the market listens. If Canada's F-35 review results in a reduced order this summer, analysts at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley will immediately begin modeling what happens when other allies follow suit. Germany already builds its own tanks through Rheinmetall. France builds its own jets through Dassault. The UK signed its own strategic partnership with the EU last year. Australia started negotiations for a European defense deal 2 weeks ago. The SAFE program was oversubscribed. 19 participating countries asked for more than the entire $150 billion allocation. The EU approved $38 billion in first-round investments in mid-February alone. Poland received $43.7 billion in commitments. Romania got $16.6 billion. Japan is watching closely. South Korea is watching closer. This is not a slow drift away from American defense exports. This is a cascade. This is a contagion. And it was triggered by the same man who promised to make America great again. But here's the nuclear option nobody in Washington is discussing. The SAFE agreement allows partner nations to develop joint procurement programs with EU member states. Canada has signed a military-industrial memorandum with Denmark and a joint AI declaration with Germany. According to Canada's new defense industrial strategy, Ottawa will invest an additional $80 billion over 5 years. A new defense investment agency will centralize approvals and remove bureaucratic obstacles. Canada is launching the Canadian Defense Industry Resilience Program to secure supply chains for critical minerals, cobalt, lithium, nickel, rare earth elements. Here is the hidden connection. Canada sits on some of the largest reserves of defense-critical minerals on the planet. If Canada becomes a primary supplier to the European defense industry through SAFE and simultaneously reduces purchases from American contractors, it creates a closed loop that cuts Washington out entirely. European money buys Canadian minerals. Canadian minerals build European weapons. European weapons defend NATO's flanks. America gets the bill for the security umbrella, but loses the revenue from selling the rain gear. It is a coordinated financial decapitation of the American defense export model. Let us push the scenario to its extreme. It is July 2026. Carney announces that Canada will purchase 60 Gripen fighters from Saab and reduce the F-35 order to 28 aircraft. Trump erupts. He threatens to decertify bombardier jets and imposes a 50% tariff on Canadian aircraft. He orders Ambassador Hoekstra to deliver an ultimatum: buy American or lose NORAD cooperation. Hoekstra, who reportedly learned about the SAFE terms from a news alert, is humiliated. Canada responds by accelerating investment in over-the-horizon radar, submarines, and Arctic surveillance drones, all purchased through European partnerships. The Five Eyes intelligence sharing arrangement comes under strain as Ottawa begins building its own foreign intelligence capability, something Canada has never possessed. NORAD, the Joint Aerospace Command that has protected North American airspace since 1958, becomes a zombie institution, technically alive, functionally hollow. The implications for continental defense are catastrophic. The Arctic, the fastest warming and most strategically contested region on Earth, becomes a zone of competing patrols rather than unified defense. Russia and China, both increasingly active in the Arctic, see the fracture and probe deeper. 7 of the 8 Arctic bordering nations are NATO members. The 8th is Russia. If the alliance fractures along the procurement line, the northern flank becomes the most vulnerable point in Western defense. This is not science fiction. Every analyst at Brookings, CNS, the Atlantic Council, and Carnegie has published some version of this warning. The only person who does not appear to have read any of them is the President of the United States. The historical parallels are haunting. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, America forced Britain and France to withdraw from Egypt, humiliating its 2 closest allies and permanently ending British imperial ambitions. The lesson: American support cannot be taken for granted. In 1971, Nixon's surprise decision to end the gold standard devastated Allied economies built around Bretton Woods. The lesson: America will prioritize its own interests at the cost of systemic stability. What we are witnessing now is the third great rupture. Trump's tariffs, his Greenland threats, his demand that Canada become the 51st state, his willingness to threaten military force against a NATO ally, these are not negotiating tactics. They are the actions of a leader who views the alliance as a burden rather than an asset, and the allies have finally stopped hoping he will change. Carney said it plainly at Davos: nostalgia will not bring back the old order. Von der Leyen said it more bluntly: it is time to build a new independent Europe. These are not idle words. These are obituaries for the Pax Americana. The British Prime Minister called Trump's remarks about Afghanistan insulting and appalling. The families of 457 British soldiers killed there fighting alongside Americans would agree. This is exactly what NATO's founders feared. Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause, was designed to prevent the exact fracture we are witnessing. It was invoked once after September 11th, when every ally rushed to support America. More than 1,000 Allied troops died in Afghanistan. Trump stood at Davos and said NATO treated America very badly. He said America never asked for anything and never got anything. This is the stress test of the Western alliance. Can NATO survive a president who treats it as a protection racket? Can it function when its largest member demands more spending while withdrawing from its own command structure? Can the system endure when the country that built it is the country tearing it apart? We are in uncharted waters. The compasses are broken, the maps are obsolete, and the captain of the flagship is steering toward the rocks. Mark Carney understood this before anyone else. He is not a military strategist. He is a central banker. He sees the world in balance sheets and risk assessments, and his assessment is clear. The risk of depending on America now exceeds the risk of going it alone. That calculation, made by a man who once ran the Bank of England and now commands the second largest NATO nation by territory, is the most dangerous verdict the alliance has ever received. So what should you watch for in the coming weeks? Watch the F-35 review. If Canada reduces or cancels the order, the domino effect begins immediately. Watch the EU safe disbursements. The first $38 billion in approved investments are already flowing to defense manufacturers across Europe. Watch whether Australia, Japan, or South Korea follow Canada into the European defense ecosystem. Watch the Arctic, where Canada is deploying radar, submarines, and surveillance drones along NATO's northern flank. If those assets are European-made, the message is unmistakable. And watch Trump's reaction. Sources say the president has been briefed on the SAFE agreement but does not grasp its long-term implications. His advisors are reportedly divided. The Pentagon sees the danger, but the trade hawks see an opportunity to impose more tariffs. The worst response would be retaliation. If Trump punishes Canada for diversifying its defense partnerships, he proves Carney's thesis that dependence on America is a vulnerability, not a strength. Every tariff, every threat, every insult drives the allies further into the arms of the EU Defense Fund. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy of American decline. For 77 years, NATO has been the most successful military alliance in human history. It deterred the Soviet Union. It unified Western Europe. It kept the peace through the Cold War, the Balkans, the War on Terror, and the rise of China. It survived because every member believed the alliance made them safer than they would be alone. That belief is dying, not because the threats have diminished. Russia wages war in Ukraine, China expands in the Arctic, and instability accelerates globally, but because the leader of the alliance has decided that leadership is a cost rather than a privilege. The alliance is not dead, but the doctor has told the family to start making arrangements. The flags are still flying in Brussels. The generals are still meeting in Norfolk, but the procurement orders are going to Stockholm, to Paris, to Berlin, and to Ottawa. The money is following the trust, and the trust has left Washington. The rain gear is being sold by someone else now, and the man holding the umbrella does not even realize the handle is slipping from his grip. Subscribe. Stay tuned. Share this with everyone who still believes the alliance is unbreakable. The architecture of the free world is being redesigned in real time, and this time, nobody asked America's permission. The history books are being rewritten this weekend.